Hello. Hello, Stephanie and Adrian. How are you? I'm going to turn down this light a little. Patrice. Hi. One second. Excuse me. Thank you. I'm sure you all blessed me. Hi, Stephanie. Happy Kislev. Hey, that's pretty good you remember it's Beryl's birthday month. Hi, Adrian. It's great to see you also. I'm using my X-ray vision tonight. So far, I'm succeeding. We'll wait a few minutes and then we'll begin. It's an exciting Parsha, as always. Hi, Lorette. How are you? So let's see what I have to tell you. I'm sure there's a lot new in the world. Well, my grandson from Israel is going to be coming home in a week before he goes to his service in Hebron. So that's very exciting to see him here. Very proud of him. And hello, Jaylee. I'm not sure we know each other, but almost nice to meet you. So I am going to begin because I want to do quite a few things in the Parsha today and also get a chance to talk about Kislev, which is the month of Hanukkah. So I actually am going to tell a story to begin. It just popped into my mind this minute. I don't think I've remembered this story in years, so I'm going to take the opportunity, since it must be a deeper reason why it popped into my mind, or not a deeper reason, but it's a Hanukkah story. So many years ago, I'll tell you exactly how many years ago, almost probably about 45 years ago, when the Chabad house in Westwood first opened up, and public menorah lightings were just beginning. Hi, Barbara. Public menorah lightings were just beginning. For many years, the menorah lightings happened, and then they were, hi, Jill. Hi, Sherry. It's just too exciting to go on. I have to say hi to everybody. So I'm just telling I'm telling a warm-up story. I'm warming myself up. So in the beginning of the Chabad house, we were going to be doing a big public menorah lighting, and we had a very large menorah. I don't know feet. I don't know feet. Maybe it was 15 feet, something very big, and it was being transported on a flatbed truck by a man whose name was Zach. Now, Zach was working in the Chabad house with us, and he was the chef, and he was really one of the most special human beings, even though so many people, everybody has a special quality to them, but he had been a merchant marine, and he had been married a few times, and he had lived all over the world, and he was big and he was strong and he loved kids. And my kids were enthralled to go to Chabad house every week because Zach would take them in the kitchen and he would help them. He would let them help cook. And first he'd give them Schwartz's chocolate marble cake with the apple on the bottom. And they would just be in seventh heaven. And he was very strong. He was very directed and a very special man. And so he's the only one, here they were all rabbis who never drove a truck before and came from Brooklyn. This was in the beginning years, and they could hardly even, hey, Aiden, Tova, how are you? They could hardly even, drive a car coming from Brooklyn. So Zach was given the job of renting a flatbed truck and driving the menorah to a big ceremony in Beverly Hills where there was going to be the mayor and, whoever thought they were distinguished, distinguished people, however you get to be a distinguished person, I don't know. But so he's driving the truck and they're all waiting. Everybody's waiting because they're going to set it up and people are waiting and people start to come. And what happens is he's going on the freeway and he didn't realize that he comes to an overpass, one of those overpasses where the cars go under, and it says maximum height like 12 feet, and the menorah is like 15 feet, or the maximum height was 10, and he has to stop right there on the 405 freeway, stop right there, and he can't go under. And obviously, there's no cell phones in those days, and he has to walk to the nearest phone that's on the freeway. Meanwhile, and he calls, and meanwhile, the police come, and it's a whole to-do, and then a whole to-do, because they are furious. They are just absolutely furious. How did you get this here? And they had to bring in reinforcements. Good morning, Yerushalayim and Sarah, Lydia. And they had to bring in people, and they had to actually stop the traffic for miles. They had to have him turn around the flatbed truck and drive off a place that was actually an entrance to come to the freeway. So that was the highway patrol, and they were really, really mad. But because of the connections that people in Chabad had, they had already gotten on the phone a police escort because they were going to be late for the mayor and the ceremony of lighting the candles. And they had a police escort waiting at that entrance of the freeway to escort the menorah. But when they got off the freeway, the highway patrolman wanted to arrest Zach because they were just furious that he would even think that he could transport this menorah under the underpass on the freeway. And there was a whole fight between the police, and guess who won? The menorah. Okay, so that was my warm-up story to begin today. And we're going to talk a little bit about Rosh Chodesh later, and the beginning of the month of Kislev, the month we're in, which is the month of lights, the festival of lights. So I want to just start with a few things from the Torah reading. This Torah reading is the Parsha of Toldot, and we're going to go into depth into two different sections. But I want to go over a beautiful teaching that just about two beautiful women, Sarah and Rivka. So it says in this week's Torah reading, it talks about how beautiful Rivka is. And in the Torah, for anybody who doesn't know Rivka, it's Rebecca is the English version, but it's, hi Sarah Anthea, but her name is Rivka. And it says that she is of good complexion. So the commentary by the Lubavitch Rebbe, he talks about that Sarah and Rivka are praised for their complexion, but only Rachel, and her son Yosef are praised for their bodily form. So what does that mean? So it means that a good complexion comes, I'm going to just pinch my cheeks for good complexion, depends on good circulation, and circulation takes place beneath the skin. So this represents in our spiritual complexion, because everything we learn, we're learning to bring out the spiritual inner teaching of it. Oh, Rala, hi. And it says that our spiritual complexion is dependent on us observing the passive commandments. What are those? It's refraining from what is forbidden. That's what it means by the passive commandments. And that to refrain from something that's forbidden involves control and inner strength. For any of you, or many of you who have been in many of my classes, I always use my lobster example of my life, making changes in that way. And in the beginning, when I did change from not being aware of keeping kosher to being kosher, it did take a resolve and an inner strength and to refrain and self-control, to refrain from things that were forbidden, that are forbidden for a Jew to eat, that will impurify them, that will make their souls coarse. Because when you eat kosher food, this is like a side note to this, it's a refinement for the soul, and it makes you more sensitive spiritually. And that is our goal, really, is this level of sensitivity that we can have within ourselves in our own lives. So it says so the good complexion is Sarah and Rivka, which is the refraining and the self-control and the inner strength to refrain from what is forbidden. And good form depends on the health of the muscles, the health of the limbs, the size of the limbs. Hi, Greggy. The size of the limbs and being the correct weight and the correct form. That's called the health of the muscles, the health of the form, the body. And our spiritual form is dependent on how we perform the positive commandments. Why? Because all the positive commandments are performed with the limbs of our bodies. So it says that in Sarah's generation and in Rivka's generation, when the world was largely unrefined, divine consciousness was brought to the fore by refraining from degenerate behavior. And in Rachel and Rachel and Yosef's generation, the world was somewhat more refined, and it was being ready to be transformed actively into making a home for godliness in the physical. And this process was complete with the giving of the Torah. So I just want another point about the giving of the Torah, which is not in this week's portion, but the refinement of the world is in this week's portion. So one of the things that we learn, it says that Jacob obeyed his father and mother. And it says it's important to be proud of our holy ancestors and to talk about their merits. But we need to recall that their ancestors, going all the way back to Avram and Sarah, were pagans, and that God, with his mercy, removed all of us from that type of environment, and he gave us his Torah, and he enabled us to have enlightened and meaningful lives. And it says there was a Talmudic sage, his name was Rabbi Yosef, and he would always celebrate the holiday of Shavuos, which was the giving of the Torah, with a lavish meal. And he said, were it not for this day, I would be like any other Yosef walking in the marketplace. And I often feel, how lucky that we are to be Jews and to have the standards and the morals and the inspiration that we do. So, L'chaim, I'm having a little L'chaim juice today for Rosh Chodesh. Hi, Amalei, I missed you. And this is in my beautiful handmade glass that was made by Sheva Chaya in the holy city of Sfat, which I miss so much. And if anybody knows how I could get into Israel, please let me know. Okay, so we're starting off the book of the Parsha of Toldot, and it says Yitzhak, Isaac, like his father Abraham, had two full sons. One was Esav and one was Yaakov. I'm going to say their names in Hebrew, but I'm just going to say the English pronunciation. Esau and Jacob is Esav and Yaakov. And Yitzhak, who's Isaac, his elder son was Esav, and Avram's elder son was Yishmael. And they were both born first, but they were of secondary status. Yitzhak's oldest son, Esav, like Abraham's oldest son, Ishmael, chose the path of unrestrained sensuality, unrestrained desire for the material and desire for that kind of wild life. And his younger son, Yaakov, just like Abraham's younger son, Yitzhak, chose the path of divine service. So, thank you, Sherry. That's very exciting. I asked how I could get into Israel, and because my grandson's a lone soldier, I possibly could get into Israel because they're being very careful about who they let in. So it says also Isaac's oldest son, Esav, and Avram's son, Ishmael, protested that their younger brothers would be the leaders in their families and the leaders really in the Jewish nation. So that's a very interesting fact, the comparison in that way. It says that Yitzhak was 40 years old when he married Rivka, and she was the daughter of a wicked person, a Besulel, and the sister of a wicked person, Lavan. And even though she was born in this totally impure and kind of evil family, it did not touch her spirituality and her inner beauty. So let's just study a little bit about what it says here about Isaac is the son of Abraham, and Abraham was the father of Isaac. It seems to be repetitive. It's saying really the same thing. So it says that Yitzhak took pride in being the son of Abraham, and Abraham took pride in having such a son as Yitzhak. And it says that when we have wonderful relatives and we take pride in them, that's good, but we have to be worthy of them having pride in us also. So it says here that it's Abraham's name is mentioned 2 times in a row. So it says here that Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Abraham was the father of Isaac. So when we see Isaac's name in this verse, there's a separation of words between the first time his name is mentioned and the second time, but not so with Abraham. So there's a lesson in this, as there is a lesson in everything we learn in Torah. It says Abraham is the embodiment of kindness, and Isaac embodies severity or restraint, boundaries. So it says that even though we sometimes have to use disciplinary measures, we don't want to have to use it in consecutive manner 2 times in a row. And it says there should always be an interval of kindness between 2 such occasions. You know, the teachings of the Torah are just so life-enhancing. So this is why Isaac's name never appears twice in succession in the whole entire Torah. But the name of Abraham, which signifies kindness, and Yaakov, which signifies harmony, appear consecutively. Also, there are different names of God, and the name of God that indicates his severity, which is Elohim, never appears twice in succession in the entire Torah, whereas the names that indicate kindness do appear twice in a row. So we know that in between each act of discipline or severity, there has to be an act of kindness. This is what we learned from the first sentence of this Parsha. I mean, and we have many sentences to go. So it says that Isaac represents a level of fear, which means doing the will of God out of either fear of punishment or out of fear of spiritual defilement caused by sin. This is called the lower level of fear. When it talks about Isaac being the son of Abraham, Abraham represents love, loving kindness, doing God's will, and loving God in order to receive some material benefit, material or spiritual reward. And this is called a small love. Next, again, in that sentence of Isaac was the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. We now have again the name Abraham, means doing God's will and loving God for no reward, just because our hearts are overflowing with wanting that connection and with loving God, and that's called a great love. And that Avram was the father of Isaac means Isaac, the level of fear, which really is awe, meaning the awareness of how great God is, and not wanting to do anything that would separate one from God, having this overwhelming desire to have this connection with God and godliness. And this is the higher level of fear, which is called awe. So we have a lower level of fear and a higher level of fear, and a lower level of love and a higher level of love. And these all are represented in the names Isaac and Abraham. And also but everything that we're learning has to be for us. So this is an aid, a hint of how we can develop spiritually, how we can add to our spiritual development. First, we serve God out of self-interest. It feels good. We like the people around us. We like the community. It's giving us something in connecting to our Jewish souls. And then it matures into a relationship of this longing and love for God that has a quality of self-transcendence to it. And we are the heirs of Avram and Sarah and Yitzhak and Rivka. We are the heirs. We inherit their qualities, and we're able to fill God's will on all these different levels in different periods of time in our life. It also said that God miraculously made Isaac's face like Abraham's, so that it would be obvious that Abraham was his father. So one of the commentaries here, the Rebbe is talking about that it wasn't when he was a child, it was when he was an adult. And what does this mean? It says that Avram was all about outreach. Avram was, oh, my niece Carrie. Hi. Avram was about reaching out to other people, reaching out to the world. I'm going to have to stop and say hi to everybody. It's just one of those kinds of nights. Hi, Debbie. So like we learned last week, it says Avram was the father of nations, and Avram's main job in life was spreading the idea that there's one God that lives in the world and exists in the world. And that's how he was. He was spreading that level out. But Yitzhak did not engage actively in this level of outreach. It says people were drawn to him. He was like a light, and people were attracted to him. And it says that he helped people uncover who they were. So he helped people be more established in their service of God. Avram was more, just turn them on, love them and leave them. Turn them on. Somebody once said to my husband, like, you got us here and now you're dropping us, because he said there's so many other people. But that was like Avram. But Yitzhak was holding the course, really. And we're going to see how that comes into play when we talk a little later on in the digging of the wells. Okay, so we go on to talk about Rivka and Yitzhak also didn't have children for many, many years. And not only did they have to pray for children, they had to plead for children. So it says that Rivka did not have a womb. This is one of the commentaries. So it was really quite miraculous that a miracle was created for them and she was able to have children. And the Talmud associates the word for plead with the word for pitchfork. They both have the same letters, and they're both have the same root in the Hebrew word. And it says, just like a pitchfork overturns the grain and moves it from place to place, the prayers of the righteous overturns God's attitude, changing it from severity to being merciful. So, some people say, why do we go to the graves of holy people? Why do we go to a Rebbe and we ask for blessings? So it's not them that we're getting the blessings from. We're asking them with their level of connection and with their ability to pray on a level that we might not be able to pray on. We're asking them to overturn the heavens and make a miracle, because some things actually do need a miracle, and miracles do happen. It can't be that miracles only happened in the time of the Torah and then they stopped. So those are the lessons that we learn from divine providence. We say, oh, it's a coincidence. You can say that, but it's not. And sometimes it's just glaring right in front of your face, and sometimes it's much more subtle. So it says that when Rivka, it goes on to say that Rivka became pregnant with twins, and the children struggled within her. And it says when she passed by a temple, a house of study, like the house of Shem and Aver, that Yaakov would, do somersaults and, assert himself. And when she passed by a temple of idol worship, Esav would try to get out. So the question is asked here, which is a very interesting question, and the Rebbe's answer is very interesting also. It says, how could the child of two entirely righteous individuals possess a propensity for evil even when he was in the womb? So the answer is because they were such holy people, because they were the patriarchs and matriarchs and had a level of spiritual perfection that they were able, that they needed to complete many things that existed in the world. And one of the things they needed to complete were all paths of spiritual refinement. So when you have a person that is spiritually unrefined, and then you can inspire them and bring them to a place of refinement, then that's taking something and elevating it to its highest level. So there are two categories of people. There are those that are totally pious, that never want to do anything wrong, that aren't tempted by evil at all. And there are those that do have an attraction to materiality and to things that might be on the forbidden realm, but they restrain themselves and they have that self-control and strength, and they're able to come to a place where their holiness reigns instead of the opposite. So it says all the couples, Avram and Sarah, had Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac and Rivka had Yaakov and Esav, and Yaakov and Leah had Yisachar and Zevulun. Now, Zevulun and Yisachar, they were two of the 12 tribes, and they worked together as a team. So Yisachar learned, and Zevulun supported them. So Zevulun took their desire for materiality in the world, and they elevated it to a different level. And it was, Zevulun had this attraction and channeled that attraction of materiality into holiness. So we say here that Yaakov, the twin Yaakov, personified the naturally pious person that never had the desire for evil. And Esav was the type that was challenged from birth. And it could have been that he could have lived up to the challenge and overcome the challenge, because his mission in the world was to show that a person who did have a propensity for evil would be able to overcome it and transform it into serving God. So that he was born deliberately with this quality, and that's why from in utero he was fighting to get out when she passed by the houses of idol worship, that she was desiring to get out, but that he really had the potential to be elevated and take all of that within him and elevate it to a much higher level. And it says until he turned 13 years old, he didn't exhibit this propensity in actuality for evil, but once he turned 13, then he did more go in that direction. And he rejected the ideals of his father, and then he became what was called a man of the field. So we see, again, we have to say that all of these things, that every word we learn is a lesson for us in our lives, and that we have the strength to overcome our challenges. And one of the things I learned many years ago, I had this wonderful woman in my life. Her name was Marjorie. And Marjorie devoted herself to helping Jewish women, she was not Jewish, make their homes beautiful, make their Chabad houses beautiful, just in service of really harmony and beauty. And I have to admit that I did make fun of her for 20 years, but then I became a devotee. And one day I was saying to her, when she was just helping me put things in order, I said, and I think I've spoken about her before. I said, Marjorie, thank you so much. I've never been able to do this alone. And she said, of course not. She said, no one can do these things alone. And so when we have this fact that we have challenges in our life, like Esav had challenges, Yaakov had challenges, we can't do it alone. We need to find somebody like besides a good friend, a mashpia, a spiritual guidance counselors, a voice that we can go to help us through. Nobody is expected to overcome these challenges by themselves. And I think this is a very important message that we can turn to people. We don't have to do it by ourselves. So it says that Esav's existence was a model of how to interact with the fields of life, that we need to take those things. Esav was called a hunter, and he was in a jungle of the mundane world, and we have to take that and transform the mundaneness of life into a home for God, that we all have the ability to do it. That's why we're here. That's why we're given this task. So it says that first we have to be dwellers in tents. What does that mean? That means we have to have a foundation. We have to learn Torah. We have to do mitzvahs. We're going to study a beautiful piece of Torah that I studied today of why that is so important. And we have to transform the field. We have to transform our environment, our home, everywhere that we are. We have to transform it, and we have to do it together. I learned something very beautiful. I study every morning for 15 minutes a morning with Rabbi Asher Brander, who used to be my neighbor, and he runs something called Link. First, he was the rabbi of Westwood Kehillah, and he runs Link, and he does a 15-minute class since COVID started every single morning. Like, it's perfect. 15 minutes, that's about my attention span after 2 cups of coffee. And so we were studying Ashes Chayil. We were studying Ashes Chayil, and it talks. There's a pasuk I was going to go over today before class, and I forgot, but hopefully I will next week. That was very enlightening to me, because it was talking about actus, this quality of unity, and it says, the actus, the unity, is not only within ourselves and not only how we put it out into the world, but that unity is also, you can have a trait, and that lovely Stella can have a little trait, and Shira can have a trait, and Patrice can have a trait, and everybody can have something, and we bring them all together, and we form a whole together. We form that quality of unity together. So, And Rivka was consoled when she knew that one of her children was not going to be of the holiest nature by the prophet telling her who the descendants of that child will be, that he will have very holy descendants that will come into the world. And if we have time, they will be converts, and one of them was Avadja, the prophet Avadja. A few weeks ago, we studied that Haftorah about his wife and about what he did. He saved hundreds of prophets. He hid them from the evil king Ahab. So that it's never too late. It's never too late. I remember once many years ago here in Los Angeles, there was a women's symposium, like of 5 women that were experts in different fields, in psychology and in medicine and in finance and in fitness, all kinds of different things. And I remember one of the women, when she was talking about her field, saying, it's never too late. And I always took that with me. She said, you might think the boat is sailed and it's going off without you, but there's always another boat coming. So it's never too late to just jump on the bandwagon and start this minute. Start making things, deeper for yourself and more connected for yourself. And I'm sure during this time, so many people have more time on their hands, so that even though I was teaching and counseling before, and I'm still teaching and counseling, I have many extra hours in a day from not driving in my car anywhere. From really that time is very, very precious, and we want to use it like we studied last week, that every single moment counts. And I'm just going to say that last night, the High Center, we had an evening that was really quite remarkable. And I want to encourage everybody. I have a friend, her name is Gina Ross, and she's a somatic experiencing therapist, and she founded the Israel Trauma Center and she does trauma work, and we did an evening with her, which was to encourage people the simple techniques that a person can do to de-stress themselves in the world. And if anybody wants, they could either look on our email. If you're not on our email list, it's highcenter.org, and we can send you that email with her information on it. But it's a few techniques of how to de-stress in the world. And then we did and there were quite a lot of people that came on the Zoom call, and then there were many, many questions, and the kindness with which people listened to other people's not troubles, but a few minutes of, people asking her questions in certain in challenging conditions. And the one thing that happened at the end that I thought was so beautiful, there was a woman who talked about suffering for 60 years with whatever she was going through, and she didn't take a lot of time. She just said, this is such a mind-blowing approach, and could this help her, and what could she do? And at the end, one of the women came on, and she said, what's your Hebrew name? We'll pray for you. And I just thought, wow, that was just, it was so beautiful. Like, we're in this together, and we want to support each other. And that's what Achdus, that's what unity means. And I know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe all the time in many, many Farbrengens, in many gatherings, would always talk about Achdus, that we need to have it together. So as a group, we can bring more holiness into the world, and we can support each other from being drawn down into the mundaneness of life and being able to raise it up, like the hope was for Esav to be able to raise that up. And so they were the brothers were fighting over the world to come. And Yaakov saw the world to come as really being pure divinity. And Esav saw it as bringing inspiration into his life, wanting to be the ruler of that level, to bring inspiration into his life. So it says that both of them, Yaakov and Esav, represent two opposing drives that exist within us. And we each have an inner Yaakov and an inner Esav. And it says that our divine soul with its godly drives is the inner Yaakov. And an inner Esav is our animating soul, the vital soul, the animal soul with its selfish drives. And when our divine soul asserts itself, it weakens the drives of the animal soul. So it says the divine soul overcomes the animal soul in the same way that light overcomes darkness. So it says light does not have to actively exert itself to disperse darkness. The darkness just fades away. If you have a totally black room and you light a match, a single match, that single match has an ability to dispel a full room of darkness. So as soon as we let holiness and godliness of our own divine soul shine into the world, that part that always is looking for that goodness, always looking for that kindness, by learning Torah, doing commandments, doing good things for other people, then the selfishness of that animal soul will disappear. And there's really, there's a beautiful little summary here, because we always learn that when Yaakov emerged, his hand was grasping Esav's heel. So what does that mean? That's always the story from the time where those of us who went to nursery school, or so I went to a Sunday school on Sunday, where they taught us about kosher, and then they served shrimp on crackers. but that's a story for another for Brangen. So it says Esav and Yaakov are metaphors for our at the vital soul, the life force soul, the animal soul and the divine soul, because Esav came from Rivka's womb before Yaakov. So our inner Esav, that animal soul, gets a head start on the inner Yaakov, because it says that the godly soul, it doesn't attach right away. So it says our divine soul comes gradually and only becomes fully mature when girls reach the age of 12 for bas mitzvah and boys reach the age of 13 for bar mitzvah. But that animal soul is full force from the time of birth. And I remember I learned in a yeshiva in Yerushalayim called Diaspora Yeshiva. And Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldstein were the heads of the yeshiva, and they had 14 children. And I, being, sweet and innocent, volunteered to help them in their house sometimes. And I remember once I came to do something in their house, babysit, and I wanted to straighten up and clean up or something, and I locked the door. I said, it's time for you all to go out and play. And they wouldn't go, so I just pushed them out the door, and I locked the doors. And they actually climbed up 3 stories outside and came in the windows. And I said to Rabbi Goldstein, these kids are so wild. I never saw such wild kids. And he said, yeah. He said, I want them to be as wild as they can be, to let out that, Yetzer Hara, the animalistic part of them, until they're bar and bas mitzvah. And then when they're bar and bas mitzvah, they will be ready to forge ahead. And all of them, I know them till this day. I see them when I go to Israel, and they're just powerful and outstanding. So maybe his theory works. I'm not highly recommending it, but maybe for him it did work. So it says Yaakov's hand was grasping Esav's heel. So it says our inner Yaakov, which is our divine soul, grasps at our inner Esav, which is the animal soul. And our purpose of coming into this world is to refine the animal soul and to grow its potential for goodness. And what is the heel? Esav's heel symbolizes, a heel is the lowest level of the body, and it's the lowest level of the animal materialism. And our souls, and our divine soul wants to elevate and refine even those aspects of life that normally are totally outside the realm of holiness. I just find that all very interesting and exciting. Okay. So it says Rivka had a complete 9-month pregnancy, which is not always so usual for twins. And I just want to make a public announcement that for many weeks, if you remember, I was making an appeal to raise money to do a bris for twins that were going to be born. And I just want everybody to know the twins were born, Mazel Tov, last Friday. The family, they're Israeli, they live a 10-hour round-trip drive out of LA in the middle of nowhere. The Moyle will be going. All the funds were raised in order to make sure that the family be able to have not only a beautiful bris, but be able, during this time when both parents lost their jobs, to be able to really be at peace and have what they need for their children. So I want to thank everybody who participated. And if anybody wants to see the picture of the cute little twins, you can email me. So it says that there was a unification of 2 paths of self-refinement that were embodied in her having twins. So there was the virtuous Yaakov, and then there was Esav, who needed again to overcome his animalistic desires, and that this commitment for goodness was a potential inside him, and we have that commitment for goodness, and we can transform even unholy aspects of creation into holiness. So, okay, let's just continue a little. So it says that the boys grew to maturity and turned 13, and Yaakov continued studying and living this holy life. And Esav became an expert in, it says, sensualism and in ensnaring his father, the word ensnaring is used in the Torah, into thinking he was pious by asking him clever questions. So he kind of pretended to be somebody that he was not. And if we have time, there's a beautiful teaching of how we rectify that cunningness that Esav had. So it says, Esav continued Avram's practice Yitzhak continued the practice of voluntarily observing the commandments, because it says until the time of the giving of the Torah, it says intuitively the matriarchs and patriarchs kept the Torah. They understood what the commandments were, and they voluntarily kept the commandments before they were actually commanded to do so. And one of the commandments is tithing, is taking a certain percentage and putting it aside for later on for the Kohanim, but in service of God. So Esav asked a very clever question about tithing salt and straw, because we know that the value of these commodities is negligible, but they are used to enhance other commodities. For example, it says, salt enhances the natural taste of food, and straw can be added to clay to make bricks. So he asked, should their worth be assessed according to their actual monetary value, or according to their value when they're used to their best advantage in producing something else? So questions like this, like he asked in that way, led Yitzhak to believe that Esav was truly pious. And in reality, that was not the fact. It says, in reality, he was undisciplined, and he spent his time in the field hunting animals and birds. And it says, Yaakov didn't pretend anything. He lived in the tents of Shem and Aver, and he studied Torah. So it says that Esav became an expert in ensnaring him. It says that we should always, it's a message for us, that we should always be on guard against our own inner Esav, our own inner evil inclination. Because the evil inclination doesn't actually come and say, hi, I'm the evil inclination, here I am, and I'm leading you astray. That's not exactly what it does. It could even give you a really pious answer why you should not do good. Don't do that good deed, and it can come up with something so holy and valid to support it. At other times, it could give you a reason why you should do the misdeed, why you should eat that, cheese lobster burger, whatever it is. It can give you a justification. It can be cunning. So we have to train ourselves to really be vigilant, to be, it's like watching your thoughts. It's like, it says, according to Tanya, the book of Tanya, written by the Alter Rebbe, that we're not responsible for all our thoughts, that thoughts just run through your mind, Sometimes you think, oh my gosh, where'd that thought come from? But we are responsible for letting it in at the gate, so that you can have a thought, and that thought can come and go, but you can have a thought and you could take it to its fullest extent, and you can think about it, and you can ruminate on it, and you can work it up or down in any way, so that we have to be vigilant. We have to really be disciplined. Discipline is very important to get things done, to make order. It's one of the traits that's very important to teach children, how to keep their things in order, how to, be very careful about, getting up and going to sleep. That's all before they're teenagers. But, as long as it's when you still can pick them up and carry them around that you have most control. So that this is something that we have to understand. And it comes to say that Yaakov left the land of Israel to live in Haran, which was a degenerate and an idolatrous environment. And he had to flee his brother Esav, who wanted to kill him. And then he had to live with and work with Lavan for 20 years till he had his wives Leah and Rachel. And he was separated for so many years from his beloved son Yosef, and he thought he was dead. And throughout all of this, he remained devout. His faith in God never wavered. It sounds like the teaching we learned last week that about Sarah and Queen Esther, that even though they had lives of hardship, their lives, all their years were considered good because they never took their eyes off their focus. They always went for the truth and they went straight ahead. And this is it, the quality of truth was very important, and Yaakov raised all his children to follow in that path. So, okay, I think I'm going to turn to something else right now. Another teaching that I studied, this teaching from Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Jacobson, and it's very, very interesting and it's very complex. So first I want to say L'chaim. I'm listening for somebody to say L'chaim back to me. And I want to tell a story. Because I want to bring in Rosh Chodesh. So I want to tell a story. So this is a little Rosh Chodesh break in the middle of the Parsha. So yesterday was Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And it was also the yurt site of Rabbi Rifki and Gabi Holtzberg, who were murdered, and the other holy Jews who were murdered in the Chabad house in Bombay, India. So I want to tell a story in their memory and for the elevation of their souls and for any good deeds that we take on and any good learning that we take on today during this class should be dedicated for them, who really sacrificed their lives in being Jews. I remember I was visiting, I had a new grandchild, and I was in Boston, and I was staying up all night with the grandchild and listening to an HBO special on this massacre in Mumbai. It was in general on the massacre, and they had a translation of the mastermind was speaking to the murderers, and there was a simultaneous translation in this documentary where they were translating it. And I think they had just massacred people at the Taj Mahal Hotel and maybe at the Victoria train station. And he's saying to them, and now you will go to Nariman House. That was what the Chabad house was called. And you will kill Jews. And he said, and the value of killing a Jew is 50 times the value of killing another person. I'll never forget hearing that. And you know, we need to strengthen ourselves. In the world, we see today that there is more revealed anti-Semitism. I don't believe it's new anti-Semitism. I just think it's Semitism that is actually coming more out to the surface. And what do we know is that when the Jews are united as one, when we can stand together with one heart, when we could care about each other and not be distant to each other and not talk badly about each other, but really see the unity among us, and there is no enemy that can ever penetrate us. And I want to give an example through this story. So I was very blessed many years ago to be asked, there's a beautiful community called Ahavas Yisrael. I think it's called Ahavas Yisrael, yeah, in Crown Heights. And they were having a Shabbaton in the Berkshire Mountains, and they invited me to come to be a speaker, one of their speakers, and I had never been to the Berkshire Mountains. And I just want to say somebody else should invite me back to the Berkshire Mountains because it poured and rained the whole entire weekend. So I got to see a lot of water. But so we had a campfire. It did stop raining a little bit, and we had a campfire. And at the campfire, it was mostly people from the synagogue came, but there was a young man, a businessman in his 30s, a very religious man from Borough Park who had come on the retreat. And people were sharing different things. And he said, I'd like to share a story with you. And he said that 2 years before he was there, so it was probably maybe 2 years after the murders in Mumbai, he was a businessman, and he was in Mumbai on business, and then he was going to go to Thailand to celebrate the holiday of Passover. And he said 2 days before Passover, he gets a call from the rabbi who is a new rabbi in the Chabad house in Mumbai, where I have visited with one of my daughters. And he gets a call and he said, could you come over here immediately? We have an emergency. So we got very nervous. He said, emergency in the Chabad house in Mumbai. And he ran over to there. And he walked in, and the rabbi was there, was sitting with other people. And the rabbi said to him, we have this emergency. In two days, it's going to be Passover, and we have no meat. They won't let us bring meat into the country. We have meat, 150 pounds of meat waiting in Thailand, and they won't let us bring it in because in India, the cow is sacred. And in fact, they wander in the streets, and they have the right of way. And you're not going to push a cow out of the way and think you're not going to get yelled at and pushed around. So they consider them holy, the people, and they don't slaughter them, and they do not eat cow's meat. Any meat that's eaten there mostly is goat meat. That's eaten by like the Muslim population, but the Hindus are pure vegetarians for the most part. And so they're not letting us bring it in. So we need somebody to go to Thailand and to bring this meat back. And he said, and since you already have a visa to go to Thailand, I want to ask you, could you go to Thailand and pick up this meat? And don't worry, when you bring it, so we can't ship it into the country, but you can bring it into the country. And when you bring it in, you'll just go through, come into the airport. We'll have a car and a driver waiting for you because we know you're going to Thailand for Passover. And then you'll just get in turn around, go back, and you'll go on the next flight and you'll go back to Thailand. So he said he agreed to do that. So he said he arrives in Thailand and he picks up this meat and he has 2 suitcases full. It's 150 pounds. And they're in packets that are stamped, glatt kosher meat. And with a stamp and a seal and a stamp. So when he's leaving Thailand and they see that, there's customs asks what's in it and they see it's meat, they said, don't you know you cannot bring meat into India? And he said, can I take it out of Thailand? And they said, yes, that's permitted. And he said, okay, I'll worry about it. Okay. So he says that he lands in Mumbai. And he goes into the airport, and you have to go through, there's an x-ray machine, and you have to go through you put your bags on the x-ray machine. And so he puts his bags on the x-ray machine, and he said all of a sudden he is surrounded by men with guns pointing at him, surrounded by people with guns. And they go, come with us. And they take his suitcases, and they take him into a room. And they start to interrogate him. And they harass him, and they interrogate him. And the person who is in there, the clerk, is just yelling at him, saying, how dare you? And we are going to lock you up in jail. And we're locking you up for 30 days. And he said, and this is not America. This is not America where you get a phone call. You don't get any phone calls. You're going to be locked up, and then you're going to be kicked out of the country after 30 days. And they're harassing him, and they're yelling at him, and at that time now, Mumbai has a very ultra-modern airport, like any other huge modern airport in the world. But in that time, in the last few years that I was traveling there, their airport was like a block long. That was it. A little, like a Banana Republic airport for such a big city. So they didn't have any computers then. So they were handwriting all the paperwork of arresting him and, locking him up and all of a sudden. So he's there for about a half hour. And then another officer comes in. He surveys the scene. And he starts yelling at this clerk. And he says, you get out of here. You were just covering for me for my tea break. This is now my prisoner, and I will take care of it. And the guy, rushes out. So this new officer comes in, and he looks at, I can't remember the name, let's say Heshi. He looks at Heshi, and he says, and he has obviously a yarmulke on, and he looks like a religious Jew, and he says, are you Chabad? And he goes, well, I'm not actually Chabad, but I'm here for Chabad. and he says to him, let me tell you a story. And he says, my cousin was a policeman who was involved in the gun battle around the Chabad house. And he said, and he was killed. And he told him that no one got in touch with the family. No one. Not the Indian government, not the police, no organization in India. Who did the family get a phone call from? They got a phone call from Chabad. And there was a rabbi calling, offering his condolences. Is there anything they could do for them? Thanking them for participating. And he looked at him and he said, so I am not going to tell you that I am now going for a tea break. And I am not going to tell you that there will be no security guard at station number 12. And he turns around and he walks out of the room. And he picks up the suitcases, he runs out of the room, he sees guard station number 12, he walks through it. The driver is still waiting, the driver that the Chabad house had sent that was going to meet him is waiting outside the airport. He hands him the luggage. He runs back in the airport. He gets on the next flight, and he flies to Thailand. And that was the story. So this story, which I think is just so deep and beautiful, I was telling, and my son Mesh has a Chabad house in Boston. And one year, and I always tell a story there at some point when we were there. I think it was Simchas Torah, and I'm telling this story. And a dear friend of ours who comes to help Mesh run the services, and if any of you have been to us for Passover, he comes in, he helps us run our Passover services. He jumps up, his name is Meir Berkowitz, he jumps up and he goes, that was my brother of Rami, that was my brother of Rami. And his brother of Rami Berkowitz, who was used to be a shliach in Russia, but at the time was in Crown Heights, was called by the head Chabad office after this massacre happened in India. And he was asked to fly to India and see if there's anything that he could do. And when he gets there, what's he going to do? He took the list of every Indian policeman and official, anyone that helped participate in this, and especially the people that were murdered, and he called them all to thank them in the name of Chabad for helping. And he had never known this story. It was like I told this story, and Meir, quote unquote, happened to be there and knew this is what his brother did. So his brother then was able to hear this story about, really indirectly, he helped the Chabad house be able to celebrate Passover. So l'chaim, everybody, that is a story really for the elevation of the soul. We celebrate a yurt site because the soul shines on those days. We're Hasidim. And this is the way we go into Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the month that we're in, just adding more light and more light as we go. So we're now going to continue with the Parsha. And then maybe I'll say another, well, we still have a few parts to the Parsha to go. Okay. Now this is a study, a teaching that I learned with Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Jacobson. Every week I encourage people, if you want to do some extraordinary learning, he has a website called theyeshiva.net. And here's what I've discovered. I'm going to give everybody, I want to give l'chaim Eidin Tov, I want to give everybody a tip on how to listen to classes if you don't have enough time. I learned this from my son Beryl when he was in law school. He told me he stopped going to classes because if he records the lectures and then he plays them back double time, then instead of having to be in class for an hour, he can actually be in class for a half hour and hear the whole lecture in a half hour. So that's how I listen to actually a lot of classes. I listen to them on double time. So that if you think you don't have time, there's so many things. There's Chabad.org. I really try every week to encourage people to do more learning. If you go on any of there, you can go on the Parsha of the week, you go on Hanukkah, you can go on Rosh Chodesh. And if you go on the video lectures and the audio lectures, there's a setting where you can actually increase the fastness. It doesn't have to be double time. It could be 1.5, 1.7, but you can actually listen to a class and get a lot of learning in, especially if you don't have a lot of time. So that's a tip. I'm sure that you'll thank me for having that tip, because it really enables you to hear a lot of classes. And and if you're taking notes, it's a little challenging. But if you're not taking notes, you just really have to focus, though. You really have to pay attention. Okay, so this is a beautiful teaching. I really want to share it with you. I had never learned this before. It's the first time I learned this particular teaching. Okay, so and one of the reasons I picked this in particular, there's so many different parts of the Parsha, is that I love mineral waters, and I love well water, and I love natural water. So this kind of teaching just drew me, and I hope, again, ladies, and I know there's a few gentlemen, but for the ladies, we do women's spa retreats, and we do them around mineral water. And actually, I spoke this week for Chabad of La Jolla. We did a Rosh Chodesh evening on Zoom, and there was a woman in the community who came with me on one of my spa retreats that I ran in Israel for women that are terrorist victims and have other challenges and difficulties in their life. And she said it was just a life-changing 4 days that she spent with these women and in the spa and in the mineral waters. So I want to invite everybody when, as my granddaughter Nava says, when Corona's over, because she wants to come sleep in my bed, but she's always looking for that day when Corona's over and we can have our retreats again, that you'll join me at the retreats that we do only around mineral water. You'll see why. The waters just draw us. It's in our history. It's in our DNA. So it says that the servants of Yitzhak and the servants of the Philistines, we know that we're digging wells, and we know that in Avram's time, Avraham dug wells, and then the Philistines filled the wells in. And then when Yitzhak came along, he redug the wells, and the servants, not only did he redig and open the wells that his father Avraham dug, but he dug new wells. And his servants were digging, and they found a well of living waters. And the shepherds of the Philistines said that this is our land, this is where we graze our cattle, and this is our water. It's not your water. And they had an argument with the shepherds of Yitzhak, and Yitzhak named this well Esek, for dispute. For the Philistines engaged him in a dispute over this particular well. Then he dug another well, and they quarreled again, and Yitzhak named it Sitna, which means harassment. And then again they dug another well, and they didn't argue, and he named it Rehovos, which means open spaces. So we go ahead forward, and there's this parsha called Huchas, and it talks about hundreds of years later, when the Jews left Egypt on their way to Eretz Israel, they came to a well that had been dug through what was called the ministers, the princes, the royal ones of the Jewish people, meaning Avraham and Yitzhak. So the question that we're going to ask now is, what's the significance of all these wells? We know you need a well, you need water for life. That's the obvious. But why? Why is it so much in our Torah? So there's actually a preoccupation with wells. So first of all, Eliezer, who is the servant of Avram, finds a wife for Yitzhak. He finds Rivka at a well. And why did he go to the well? Because he knew that it's like some people go to the pizza shop here. He knew that all the girls would go to, it wasn't that they were hanging out at the well, but they were there to draw water for their families, for their cattle, for their sheep, their families, themselves. Okay, so that's the first time. The second time is Yaakov goes to the well. The third time is Moshe goes to the well. We know that Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, were around water. Abraham and Sarah didn't meet at the water, but they dug wells. And Rivka was met by Eliezer at a well, and then when she came to meet Yitzhak, he was coming from a well. So there's so many wells in the book of Bereshit. It's significant. And it says that he dug 7 wells in his lifetime. So what is the meaning? What does this mean? So the Gemara focuses on the fact that in the book of Bereshit, we go back to the first Parsha, that God creates Adam and Chava, and he plants a garden in a place called Eden. We have my dear friend Aiden Tova, who is watching the class tonight. And the Parsha then says that a river flows from Eden to irrigate the garden. An orchard, why? Because an orchard needs water. And from the Gan is the Hebrew word for garden, the river splits into 4 outlets. And Torah names them. The first is Pishon, which is called the Nile Delta. The second is Gihon, which we don't know what river that is. The third is Hadechel, which is the Tigris River. And the fourth is Pros, which is the Euphrates River. And the Tigris and the Euphrates were both in Iraq. The Gemara says that if someone makes a vow, and their vow is, I am not going to drink from the water of the Euphrates, then he is not allowed to drink from any of the rivers of the world. Okay, again, if a person makes a vow, and their vow is they're not going to drink from the river of the Euphrates, they are not allowed to drink from any of the rivers of the waters of the world. Why? Because all the rivers originate in the Euphrates, in the river called Pros. And the Gemara says that this is the original river, that we say that 4 rivers diverge from the original river, but the Euphrates is the original river. And it split into the three other rivers that we talked about. And so the Aden is connected to the Euphrates, to Pros. And then they all flow from all these other rivers. All the rivers of the world flow from the Euphrates. And it says below the earth the water flows. And therefore, with digging, we find water. That's how we find the water, is by digging. And it says, and why is it called a wellspring? Because a wellspring is different than a river. So the spiritual answer, because we know that also that you can have water beneath the surface, but if you don't dig to release it, then it's not of use if it just is remaining beneath the surface. It's interesting for anybody here who has been to the Ein Gedi kibbutz. The Ein Gedi kibbutz is built on a wellspring, the Ein Gedi waters, the waters of Ein Gedi. And these waters, and the kibbutz is like a botanical garden because it has a 365-day-a-year growing season. It's just absolutely beautiful. And it says that the waters come to Ein Gedi from Hebron, that the water starts in Hebron and they go underground, and it takes 400 years of travel underground, whatever that means. That's just how the director, who I met on a cruise and told me that there was a kibbutz there when I used to just go there for the hot spring, and that's how I started to do my retreats there over 20-something years ago. I think over 24 years ago is when I met him. And he said that the waters come from Hebron and then they bubble up in Ein Gedi. That made me so happy. You know, 2 of my favorite places, Hebron and Ein Gedi. so that the waters come from underground, but they have to have a way to be released. They have to wait a way to come up. So it says spiritually is, what is the meaning of the original river that flows to water the garden? So we know the word gan is gimel nun in Hebrew, and that equals 53. And it represents the 53 sedras, the 53 parshas of the Torah. The river that flows from Gan Eden is the river that flows to irrigate the 53 parshas in the Torah, which are the prerequisites of Judaism. It's our foundation. That's where we have our foundation from. So a question is asked. It's talking about different things that are discussed in these different parshas. And it's one of the things is we're taught about the Shema. But the Shema comes not in the order that it doesn't come first. There are many other things that we learn that we're supposed to take on ourselves and do in terms of mitzvahs that come before the learning of the Shema. But it says that the Shema is the most important, and the question is why. So it says a person should accept upon themselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which is represented by saying the Shema, and then the yoke of the commandments and the mitzvahs. So we learn from the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, that what does it mean to accept the yoke of heaven in a wholesome way? So it's something that, for many of you who have been in any of my classes, I really love to talk about when it shows up in the Tanya, of wearing the yoke of heaven. And it's like you have 2 oxen, and the oxen have a yoke over their shoulders that holds their head in place, so that when they're plowing the field and that when they're walking, they have to look straight ahead and they have to go straight ahead. It doesn't allow them to turn to the right or to the left. They could only go straight. That yoke is keeping them straight. So it says we need, and what is that yoke of bearing the yoke of heaven? It's to believe with complete faith in the unity of God, that God brings the world into existence and that there is nothing in the world that is separated, that everything is in front of God and nothing has an independent significance because it's all one. And it doesn't only mean that we accept upon ourselves a creator in the world. It means that we recognize, and this is, these are easy words. I just want to say, these are easy words, but the concept needs meditation. It means deep introspection, connection. It means you recognize the oneness of existence, the harmony that's in existence, that everything is interconnected, that there's a oneness within God, and that Hashem is the reality, and everything is an aspect of Hashem. Hashem meaning the name, which is God. And this is what the yoke of heaven means, that we live with oneness. We tune into the harmony of existence, that we are a manifestation of God in this world. And we need to meditate. Meditate is very important. We need to meditate on what we learn. And if in an evening we learn so many multifaceted aspects of Torah, take one of them. Write down one of them that speaks to you, that speaks to your heart, that makes you excited, that makes you shine, and meditate on that one and delve into it and learn about it, and then take another one. So it says that meditate during the Shema. We tune in consciously with our mind. We pay attention, we're aware. We internalize this reality of the existence of God, the oneness in the world. But it's not just in the brain. We have to internalize it in our heart. Like we breathe in the concept. We take it into our inner being and accept it as truth. It's there's not a separateness. Sometimes when we feel there's a separateness between what we learn and what we're willing to take in our hearts, it remains only in our head. And that's the whole system of Chabad, is we learn with our head, but we have to draw it into our heart. And that warmth in the heart will go back up, and we'll want to learn more and make more connections. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And there is this sense of what we call achdus, the sense of unity, the desire to have intimacy with true reality. And the soul is longing for this. The soul feels this oneness. But it says that there's a challenge, and our brain compartmentalizes. And we split because there's so much going on. And we don't always feel, or even maybe ever feel, that we're a conduit for God in this world, that everything is from God, everything is one. Because the word world, olam, comes from the word helam, which means concealment. Everything is concealed. If we could see godliness standing in front of us, there would be no question that we would only want to go in that way. So it says, even if I can accept where it can be manifest, it's only in the Torah. That's where we're going to find it. And it says right after we accept the yoke of heaven, we have to put it into a concrete form. And the depth of doing that is study, is learning. After prayer, after we meditate, after prayer, we need to put in our mind to learn what we call the oral tradition, the different mitzvahs, the different teachings of the Torah. It will inspire us. It will ground us in many ways. We have to delve into it, work with it, because that's the place where the oneness is most manifest. There's a saying, in which mitzvah did your father shine in? Like what mitzvah draws you? What mitzvah speaks to you? Certainly, there are different mitzvahs that people are just shining in. I see, there are many, many groups that are devoted to caring for widows in Los Angeles. And they are always trying to do good, to knock on your door and bring you a beautiful plant, to bring a smile to someone's face. I remember when my daughters were getting married, there were people devoted to making sure that a bride has everything that she needs and wants to set up her home in the most beautiful way. There are people who are devoted to burying the dead. I know I belong to a group in the Chevra Kadisha, and whenever they put on the WhatsApp that there's a body that needs to be cared for burial, it doesn't take more than 1 minute to get 4 women to respond. I'll do it. And often it involves flying to Las Vegas, driving 2.5 hours each way to Palm Springs, going to Riverside, going to Santa Barbara. It's not like just down the street in Santa Monica. And immediately, there are so many people that are devoted to they shine in different mitzvahs in their life. And once you open that door, it takes you in deeper and deeper and deeper. Find that thing that speaks to you. Find calling up a lonely person every week, making food for a neighbor, whatever it is, what will bring that prayer down into the concrete so that you can be one with the creation. And it says, then we appreciate the unity of God in this world. So it says, God is called Aden, sweetness. The river represents the flow. There is a river that flows from Aden to irrigate the garden. And remember, the garden are the 53 different sections of Torah. And Aden represents God himself, all pleasure and delight, to irrigate, to hydrate this garden with water. And this godliness flows from Aden, and it gives this hydration and water to the garden. Through the Shema, a person experiences a flow of godliness from above to below. And they can irrigate their lives, they can irrigate their environment, they can irrigate their world. One of the things that Gina Ross said last night in her talk about helping to alleviate traumas and helping, and I'm not referring to major, God forbid, traumas in a person's life, but the everyday traumas that a person encounters, the everyday circumstances that a person encounters, that she said, somebody said that their wife was not well, and that he knew that this type of work of just de-stressing, learning how to breathe, learning how to just ground yourself could be so good for her. But she's not in a mental state at the moment to be able to do that. And Gina's answer to him was, you do that for her. You do that, and you send her that energy. So that when we can come to say the Shema and to irrigate through bringing the flow of godliness down into the world and down into our lives, and we can send it out, we can send that energy out to different places, to different people, then we can unite together. It's a way to bring unity. And it says that ever since the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, was destroyed, what we have is, it's called the 4 cubits of halacha, of Jewish law. We have a path to follow. We have something to hold on to. And it says that Torah is a sanctuary. And it's being like in the chamber of the king. And we can connect with a level of consciousness. You know, things matter. One of the things that we learned from the Philistines, it says that what were they doing when they were filling in the wells? They were making the wells insignificant. It says that they calls them uncircumcised, which means it refers to a level of mentality. They were not evil people. They were not called evil. They were not called sinful like the people of Egypt was, or the people of Canaan. It said they just were unenthusiastic. Things weren't important. It was not a big deal. So I just want to encourage people in the mitzvahs that they're doing, in the commandments that they have taken on themselves, to make sure that it is a big deal, that you know how to perform them, that they have a boundary, they have a structure, that when it's time to light candles on Friday night, and the candle lighting times fluctuate wildly, that it's important that they be lit as Shabbos is coming in, not on Shabbos. Because when you're lighting, and you're lighting in the correct time, and you're ushering in that holy light into the world, then you bring that energy and you make a difference. But if it's, oh, well, what's the difference? My family comes home at 9 o'clock at night, I'll light then. I won't light at 5 in the afternoon when they're not home. But then you just have candles. You have candles on your table, but you don't have Shabbos candles. You're not part of the creation that's helping to bring in the holiness of the Shabbos into the world. So everything does matter. It's not, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It does matter. The details matter, and they reflect the unity of the king. And it says the consciousness of the unity of the oneness of God is when you bring the river from Eden and you irrigate the garden. Because we know you can grow a garden without water. You can. You can have a cactus garden. In California, they're always telling you to grow a garden without water. But it says, so what does that mean? It means a person can learn Torah. And in the person's consciousness, it could be detached. You could be, it's like bird watching. One of the things of bird watching is you accumulate, how many birds you see. You saw this one, and it's how many did you see? How many did you see? You could be accumulating things, but be detached from them because they're not being watered. And it says that when they're not being watered, then you're not fully alive. You're not fully alive to the possibilities that you can draw this godliness down into yourself and energetically pass it on throughout the world. So it says, a person prays with the yoke of heaven, and this river comes from Eden. And there's this sense of oneness that the flow gives to the irrigation, and the ability to enliven, to help grow the garden. And it says that the place where the person can hold on to this is in what we call the octus, in the unity. We have to find what unites us. We have to really make that effort to be united and to be able to care deeply, deeply for each other. And learning after we pray, learning in our daytime is feeding this, is helping this. So every piece of Torah is divinity, it's godliness, it's not just information. And praying is the river that brings that water into the garden. And what is prayer? Prayer doesn't necessarily mean spending time saying words that are insignificant to you and you don't know. Prayer can be sighing from the depth of your heart. Prayer is speaking to God. And prayer is using a prayer book, seeing a formula, and maybe taking a line and meditating on it and learning it and doing the next one and doing the next one. I remember when I first came to Israel in the early 1970s, and I was raised in a Reform temple where everything was in English, and there was very little prayers at that time. Mostly it was musical. And so I really had never heard of really praying. And when I lived in India, it was more meditating, it was prayer through meditation. So I never had the formal, experience, but I really wanted to learn it. And I remember I had a friend, her name is Esther. She lives in Israel in a place called Mitzad. It's in the middle of nowhere on top of a mountain for many years. And she sat next to me in a synagogue for months and months and months. And she sat right next to me. And she would show me where the service was. And she would, so I learned the order of the service. But I didn't rush to pray with the service. But she also taught me to take my time, to read the words, to understand them. But I always felt a familiarity because I could understand where they were up to. So even though I might not be in on the same page that they were in, I felt comfortable because I understood what was going on around me. So that I think it's very important to understand. It's important to understand what you're saying. It's important for those words to come out of your mouth in that way. So it says that this is the river that brings the water into the garden. And here's where we can connect. And the truth is that in Torah, everything is unity. Everything is connection. Everything is oneness. So I hope everybody enjoyed that little piece. And there's one more thing I would like. I mean, there's so many more teachings that I prepared that I would like to do, but I'm going to do just one. I can't resist. I'm going to do one more. Okay. So this is a deep disc. This is taken. I'm just doing highlights that are taken from a very deep teaching. That is a. Well, you know what? I think I'm going to do a different one, and then if we have more time, I'm going to do that because. Okay. So, it says that the matriarchs and the patriarchs, that God gave them a foretaste of the world to come. And this was only with regard to the future delight. It says with Yitzhak that his total life was in the manner of the future. Why? Because we talked a little about the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac and the non-sacrifice of Isaac. And it says at that time his soul departed and was replaced with a soul from the world to come. He was already in that place. And the uniqueness of the qualities of him is that he transcended this world, but he brought that transcendence back with him into the world. And this is going to be explained a little later on. So it says the lads grew. And it said, when they reached the age of 13, Yaakov went on his way to the house of learning, and Esav went on his way to idolatry. So there was a problem. It says that Avram was supposed to live 180 years, but it says he only lived 175 years because he didn't want to see the depravity of his grandson Esav to protect him. You know, I remember I was listening to a really wonderful tape by a man named Gabor Mate, who teaches about addictions connected to childhood trauma. He's actually very fascinating, and I learned really so much by listening to him. But a funny part of his talk once is that he said his mother was in a nursing home, and his mother was with it, but she was old. She was older. He's my age. Whoever guesses what my age is gets a free Shabbos dinner. So he was my age. And so you would say he had a lot of life behind him. And he needed some kind of minor, like arthroscopic surgery or something on his knee. But he didn't want his mother to know because he didn't want her to worry. And he was supposed to go visit her. So he said he practiced like walking without a limp. He was practicing for those few minutes he would come into her room because he didn't want her to worry. And then he started laughing when he's telling this story. He didn't think she could take it, seeing him injured. And then he started laughing and he said, my mother went through the Holocaust. She had to go in hiding. She had to give me up for a while. And he goes through, then I think maybe his father was killed, and then she has to go through Europe by herself, and she has to, get on a train and a plane and whatever. However, she got out of the countries and snuck out and came to Canada and he's going, and I'm afraid that she can't take it. It says that here that they wanted to hide from Abraham, the fact that his grandson would be a depraved child. So, but it says that Avram was still alive when his grandson Esav went into idolatry because he was 100 years old when Yitzhak was born. And Yitzhak was 60 when Yaakov and Esav were born. And Esav was 13 when he followed idolatry, which meant that Avram was only 173 years old at the time. And he would see his grandson being depraved up until for 2 years. So what does all this mean? So the commentary is saying that during these 2 years, Esav did not sin openly, but he only sinned in secret. So now you can have another question. If he could sin in secret for 2 years, why couldn't he have sinned in secret for another 5 years? And Avram wouldn't have had to be deprived of 5 more years of life. So there's a sage who gives another solution. It says that from the time of the Akedah, from the time of the binding of Isaac, until Rivka, his future wife, was 3 years old, and one day he was in the Garden of Eden. I just want to say l'chaim to Shevachaya, an advertisement today. We're drinking out of her glass from the holy city of Sfat. So I want everybody to send me energy that I can get back to the holy city of Sfat and have a real cup of water and wine with Shevachaya. So l'chaim, that we all go there together, and that we all can be there together. So it says that the Garden of Eden transcends mundane time. And then it goes into, I'm not going to go into all the details of the years, but this is a question that's asked. So it says that Yitzhak's stay in Gan Eden affected him and remained with him even as he returned to the world below. So then he had this transcendent soul that accompanied him back, and he was able to draw this transcendence down into this world. And because how else would he have been able to say, the odor of my son Yaakov is like the odor of a field which the Eternal has blessed, meaning Gan Eden, that he remembered the smell, he remembered the aroma of Gan Eden when he was there. So, and it says here that when a soul descends from the Garden of Eden to this world, an angel comes and strikes the child right above the mouth and causes it to forget the whole entire Torah, so that there won't be any interference in the type and the order of the service of God that the person needs to live in this physical world. So it says that when a baby is in the mother's womb, it's taught the whole Torah. And as soon as it sees light, this angel comes and strikes it on the mouth to forget the Torah. So it says this soul is not yet attached to the body. So when the soul is in the embryonic fluid, when the body is floating around, the soul is not yet attached to the body, and it absorbs the whole entire totality of the Torah. But at the moment of birth, when the soul is then joined to the physical body, the Torah is forgotten in order to enable a person to do their spiritual practice as a compound of body and soul, not just as a soul. And it's a very different experience. So it goes on to say that when the soul needs to ascend, it must forget the vision of the world. So it says when the soul ascends on the different rungs of the spiritual world, it has to leave its previous experiences behind, regardless of how sublime and wonderful they were, because in relation to the new and higher level, the level that the person has come from is limited and obstructive. And this applies when ascending from even one high spiritual level to another higher spiritual level. That exists then, let alone from moving from the physical world to the spiritual world. So it says even the lower stages and levels are a preparation to ascend higher. And we know that they descended for the purpose of an ascent. So we know that all the virtues that the matriarchs and patriarchs possessed are to be found in every single Jew. And that is why when we say our prayers, it says the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Because each of these unique attributes that they each possess are our inheritance, and that these add to our own spiritual avoda, what we're able to do in our own spiritual life. And the same applies also to Shabbos. Shabbos is the day from which all the days of the week are blessed. And a few weeks ago, we learned in detail about the days of the week, that Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, the different levels of soul of those days, how they're attached to the Shabbos that had just passed. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, with the different levels of soul, how they're attached to the Shabbos that's coming. So everything is connected to Shabbos every day. And Shabbos transcends time, and this affects the service of the whole entire week. And we need to remember Shabbos every day. And we say the first day of the Shabbos, the second day of the Shabbos. And this is part of the mitzvah of that we're commanded to remember the Shabbos day. I remember being in Machon Beis Chana in Minnesota in I don't know when, maybe 1976, with Hannah Rachel Schusterman, and I remember she got mail from Rabbi Gedalia Koenig, Oliver Shalom, who is the head of the Breslov movement, who we both had studied with in Yerushalayim, but she was really very connected to him. And that was the first time I ever saw on a letterhead. She would always show me the letters, and it would say, today is the first day toward Shabbos. Today is the second day toward of the Shabbos. And it was just very moving that every day, that was the way he wrote the dates, how they were connected to Shabbos. And I had never seen that before. So it says the relevance of this concept of every day being Shabbos of every day connected to Shabbos in terms of our own personal spiritual work is that we are called upon to devote ourselves to God. That means to leave a level of connection to worldly desires, attributes, pursuits in order to serve God. And it says we want to behold the pleasantness of the eternal, but we can say we're bound up with our bodies and with our animal souls, and that strawberry ice cream is calling to me. And we're in this material world. So how can we renounce mundane pleasures to seek only otherworldly delights? But we are given a special ability from God to ponder and consider the future to come and to consider Gan Eden. And we can say, behold, the odor is of Gan Eden, meaning that mundane delights, or even real ones, are nothing more than worthless specks in comparison to the delights of Gan Eden. And so it says that the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich taught that when one sees an attractive person or object, they should think about the true nature and source of the beauty. Because if that person was lifeless, the beauty would no longer be prevalent. And the beauty is not inherent in the body, but derives from the divine force which animates the body. And we talked, remember, in the beginning of the class about form and beauty. And it says that they are the spiritual essence of the person or object, and this all comes from God. And the body is worthless on its own. It needs that animating force of divinity. And the divine force is the root and source of beauty. And it says that why should we be then drawn after false beauty? Things that are just specks, things that are don't have that truth of eternal beauty and divine beauty with them, than when you can become attached to the source and the root of beauty itself. So why forego the real thing for something that's mundane? That's the question that's being asked. And it says that this can be achieved by a concept we've learned it many times before in these classes and in the classes that we've had in person, by this quality of what we call bitul, self-nullification, or Kabbalah Sol that we were just talking about, wearing the yoke of heaven, going in that direction, neither looking to the right nor to the left, but having that as our foundation. And it says that thus came the maiden to the king. And what is the maiden is called self-nullification. So here is the footnote on it. It says, this verse relates how the maidens came to King Ahasuerus after anointing and preparing themselves. So when the girls for the queen for the day beauty contest were brought in, they anointed and they were able to bring in anything of their beauty that they wanted. I just want to just back up in terms of beauty contest, that you can see it on one of the clips with the Rebbe, but we brought Bess Meyerson, who was the only Jewish Miss America ever, and it's a long story, and I think I've told part of the story in many classes, but for another time. But we brought it to the Rebbe because she wanted to thank the Rebbe for a particular blessing that she had got. And the Rebbe said to her, "I hear you were a champion." And he really was referring to when she was the beauty queen. And he said, "I hear you are," I don't know if he said exactly you were or you are a champion, which I don't want to misquote the Rebbe, but it was, you were or are a champion, a queen. And as a champion, you should speak publicly for Yiddishkeit. So all of us, every holy Jewish woman is a champion. And we need to be messengers and to teach. And it says in Torah, if you know 2 letters, Aleph and Beis, then you can teach Aleph. Go to your neighbors, go to your friends, call them up on the phone if you're not really seeing people. Bring those Shabbos candles to their doorstep. Ask them if they want a mezuzah. We have people who are willing to donate mezuzahs. We have people who are willing to donate to fill-in. We have people who are willing to bring you a year's supply of Shabbos candles. But don't keep it to yourself. Spread it, because we know that light never diminishes when you spread it. So these maidens came to King Ahasuerus, and they anointed themselves. And what do we mean by king? So when we talk about king in the Megillah, Esther, we mean God. And it says, so this particular verse is speaking about souls going higher, souls ascending, when the beautiful maidens, after anointing and preparing themselves, come to the king, when the soul comes to God, ascending to a higher level. And what does it have to do? It has to leave the state it was in. It has to divest from the previous state, which means a total negation of the self. And then the soul comes to ascend to a higher level and be closer to divinity. And we know that each of the patriarchs and the matriarchs had a unique quality that was their particular attribute in divine service. Abraham is called Abraham who loved me, chesed, kindness unto Abraham. That loving kindness relates to him and to Sarah. With regard to Yitzhak, Yitzhak is referred to as God is referred to as the dread of Yitzhak, indicating this level. Remember, right before we did a teaching on the lower level of fear, the higher level of awe, severity, strictness. This relates to Yitzhak. Chesed signifies attraction. Gevurah signifies withdrawal. Because when you have this fear and this awe, that you understand that we, compared to God, are really ultimate nothing compared in this glow and light. And that's what we want to be. We want to be a vessel. We want to be an open vessel to receive this light and to wear the yoke of heaven and to pass it on. So it says that all thoughts have to be concentrated on the essence, and we achieve this by this quality of Kabbalah soul that we've talked about when we were talking about the rivers, the 4 rivers that flowed from the Garden of Eden. And this is the quality that we are looking for, is how to wear the yoke of heaven. So we're going to have to save all the many other things I prepared to teach for another time. Maybe once I'll run out of something to say and I can back up. And so I want to actually thank everybody for coming to the class tonight. And it should be really a beautiful week. Today is the 2nd day of the month of Kislev. We're coming into so many holidays. This is the month of dreams. We're going to be into the dreams of Yosef in the Torah. And I would just want to really encourage everybody, if you have any extra time, to go on some websites and do some more learning at Chabad.org or the yeshiva.net. There's so many websites. There's a beautiful women's program in Israel called Shaviti. There's Beis Chana. There's Ascent. If anybody is any of our ex-students from Sfat, from Ascent, Shul Leiter teaches a class every Sunday morning at 12 o'clock California time on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. I want to dedicate everything we studied tonight and all the learning, not only to the holy Jews that were murdered on Rosh Chodesh in Mumbai, India, but also for the complete healing of our dear friend Baruch Nakshan, Baruch Ben Leah, should have a complete healing, and for everybody else, anybody else who needs a healing, and that we really should merit to see the true peace and the true peace in Israel. And I hope everybody's going to join me in Sfat soon, because I'm hoping to be on the way eventually with all of you. So anyway, thank you so much for coming, and we will have class again next Wednesday, and everybody should have a blessed week. Okay, bye-bye.